The leather folder was heavier than it looked. I remember thinking that as I sat across from my notary, Raymond Keach, in his office on King Street West in Toronto, a Tuesday afternoon in late October, rain tapping against the window, the kind of gray day that makes everything feel significant. I had spent 41 years building Ashgrove Property Group. Started with a duplex in Scarborough in 1983, borrowed against my parents' house to do it. My father thought I was out of my mind. My mother lit a candle at St. Anthony's and prayed I wouldn't lose the shirt off my back. By 2005, we had commercial properties in Hamilton, Kitchener, and London. By 2019, the portfolio sat at just under 3.2 million square feet. It wasn't glamorous. It was concrete and leaky roofs and tenants who called at 2 in the morning, and lawyers and city inspectors and years of showing up when you'd rather stay in bed. But it was mine, every square inch of it, and I was about to sign 38% of it, the residential holdings, the part I'd always kept closest, over to my daughter. She was sitting 2 chairs to my left, 34 years old, dark hair pulled back the way her mother used to wear it. She had her reading glasses on, and she was flipping through the transfer documents with what I can only describe as professional calm, the kind of composure I used to admire in her. I had raised her to be sharp. Apparently I had done too good a job. Raymond was explaining the transfer tax implications under Ontario law, something about the land transfer exemption for qualifying family transfers under Section 3 of the Land Transfer Tax Act. I had heard this explanation 3 times already, in 3 separate meetings. I nodded like I was still listening. My phone was face down on the table. I had turned it over so it wouldn't distract me. It buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a 3rd time, rapid, the kind of pattern that means someone is either very excited or very anxious. "Excuse me just a moment," I said. I turned the phone over. It was a text from Victor Arsenault. He'd been my operations manager for 22 years. Started when he was 26, still driving a beater Civic and eating vending machine sandwiches for lunch. I'd trusted him with keys, with codes, with conversations I wouldn't have had with my own brother. In 22 years, Vic had texted me during a meeting exactly twice. Once when a pipe burst in our Kitchener building, and the main floor was flooding. Once when his wife went into early labor. The text said, "Don't sign anything today, please. I need to show you something first. I'm sorry." I stared at it for what must have been a full 10 seconds. "Dad," my daughter looked over. "Everything okay? Fine," I said. "Minor thing at one of the properties." I set the phone face down again. My hand was steady. "I don't know how," Raymond continued talking. I heard maybe 1 word in 5. My daughter turned back to the documents. The rain kept tapping. I sat there with a sensation I hadn't felt since I was a young man. The feeling that the floor under me might not be as solid as I'd assumed. I had not always planned to give her the residential portfolio. For most of her childhood and her 20s, I'd assumed I would hold everything in trust until I was genuinely too old to manage it, then transfer through the estate, split equitably. I have 2 children. My son lives in Vancouver. He's a physiotherapist. He made it clear 15 years ago that he had no interest in the business, and I respected that completely. He came to me at 23 and said, "Dad, I love you and I love what you built, but concrete and tenants are not what I want my life to be." We shook hands, and that was that. He calls me every Sunday. He is a good man. My daughter was different. She came back to Toronto after her MBA at Dalhousie, and she asked to work in the business. She started in leasing, learned the numbers, moved into acquisitions. By the time she was 28, she was running 3 of our Hamilton properties independently. I was proud, genuinely. The kind of pride that makes your chest ache a little, because you realize the thing you built might actually outlast you. Her husband, she married 6 years ago, worked in financial planning, independent practice in Mississauga. I had never been close with him. He was polite in the way that some people are polite when they want something. He remembered your coffee order and asked about your knee after surgery and said all the right things, and somehow you always felt afterward like you'd been assessed. My wife, before she passed, 4 years ago, ovarian cancer, 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end, she used to say he reminded her of a real estate agent who knew the house had a problem, but was going to wait and see if you noticed. I had dismissed that. I told myself she just needed time to warm up to him. I told myself I was being fair. I am not sure I was being fair. I did not call Vic back during the meeting. I told Raymond I needed to postpone the signing by 1 week. A minor title question had come up on one of the Kitchener properties, and I wanted everything clean before we proceeded. Raymond didn't blink. My daughter looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mild irritation, maybe, or something else. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need, Dad." I drove myself home to Oakville. I have lived in the same house for 29 years. My wife picked it. Back deck facing the garden. Enough room for a guest suite so her mother could visit. I still sleep on my side of the bed. I called Vic from the kitchen before I even took my coat off. He answered on the first ring. "How long have you had this?" I asked. I hadn't said hello. "I got the first email 3 weeks ago," he said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I told myself I was misreading it. Then the second one came. And then the third one. Who sent them?" "I don't know. Anonymous. Encrypted account. I had my nephew look at it. He does cybersecurity, and he said there was no tracing it. All right. Come to the house." He was there in 40 minutes. He sat at my kitchen table with his laptop open and his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he hadn't touched. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in 3 weeks, because, as it turned out, he hadn't. The first email had arrived on a Sunday evening in late September. The subject line was blank. The body contained a single PDF attachment. Vic opened it and showed me. It was a chain of emails between my daughter and her husband. I need to stop here and tell you something about how I read those emails. I am 63 years old. I have negotiated commercial leases with people who were actively trying to deceive me. I have sat across from contractors who looked me in the eye and lied. I have been in this business long enough to know that documents can be altered, that context matters, that you should not draw conclusions from incomplete information. I read those emails 3 times before I let myself believe what they said. The first chain was from August, my daughter to her husband. She was writing about the transfer, about the timing, about needing it completed before the end of the fiscal year. That part was normal. We had discussed the timing together. But then, he won't look too closely at the residential trust structure. He trusts me. That's the whole point. Her husband's reply, "Just make sure the Keach meeting happens before he talks to Barrister Collins again. Collins will catch it." Barrister Collins was my estate lawyer, a different firm from Raymond Kitch, who handled the property transfers. I used 2 separate legal teams deliberately, one of the habits of 40 years in this business. Collins handled my will and estate planning. Kitch handled the property transfers. They were not in regular contact. What my daughter and her husband apparently understood, and what I had not fully considered, was that the transfer documents Raymond had prepared contained a clause, buried on page 11, in a section concerning management rights and operational decision authority, that would have given my daughter, and by extension her husband, as co-signatory to her personal holding company, effective veto power over any disposition of the assets within a 10-year period, including any changes I might want to make to my will, including any attempt by me to reclaim control. It was not a gift. It was a cage with a bow on it. I set the laptop down. Vic didn't say anything. He was watching me the way people watch someone who has just been told difficult news by a doctor, waiting to see which way it goes. "The second email," I said. The second PDF had arrived 2 weeks after the first. It was a series of text messages, screenshots, not emails, between my daughter and someone whose contact name appeared only as initial, T. I did not know who T was. I still don't. But from the content of those messages, T was someone my daughter had been seeing. The texts made this unmistakable, and someone to whom she had apparently made certain promises about her future, her independence, and her financial position. "Once the transfer is done, I control the whole residential side. Martin can't touch it. Martin is my son-in-law's first name. So you're leaving him? After the dust settles. There's a 2-year cooling period in the management clause. I have to be patient. You've been patient for 6 years, I know." I put the laptop face down on the table. I want to be careful here about what I say and what I don't say. I am not going to tell you I understood everything in that moment. I am not going to tell you I was calm. I am a 63-year-old man, and I sat in my own kitchen in the house my wife picked out. And I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about my daughter at 7 years old, making me a Father's Day card out of construction paper and pasta shapes, because that's what they did in grade 2. I thought about driving her to Dal for the first time, her sitting in the passenger seat with a road atlas open across her knees even though we both had GPS, because she liked to know where she was going. I did not cry, but it was a near thing. Vic stayed until 11. By the time he left, I had a clearer picture, though not a complete one. What I knew: the transfer documents contained provisions that had not been explained to me fully, and that my daughter had apparently been aware of these provisions and had not corrected the gap in my understanding. What I suspected but could not yet prove: her husband had been involved in structuring those provisions, possibly through a contact at another firm. What I did not know: the full extent of the plan, the timeline, or what they intended to do with the assets once they had effective control. I also didn't know who had sent Vic those emails and screenshots. I still don't. That question has stayed with me. Someone knew what was happening and chose to intervene, and chose not to identify themselves while doing it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about who that person might be and why they made that choice, and I don't have an answer. But I know that whoever it was, they saved me from something I might not have been able to undo. I'm grateful in a way that doesn't have a clean name. I spent the next 4 days doing 2 things. I was careful about both. The first was calling Barrister Collins, my estate lawyer, and scheduling what I described as a routine review of my overall planning documents. I did not tell her what I suspected. I asked her to look at the Keach transfer documents independently and flag anything she found notable. She called me back within 48 hours. Her voice was professional, and even the way lawyers' voices are when they are being careful. "There's a provision on page 11 concerning management authority that I'd want to discuss with you," she said. "It's not standard for a simple family transfer. I'm not sure you'd intended this scope." "No," I said. "I didn't. I thought not. I also want to look at the subsidiary holding structure your daughter registered in September. It's not directly connected to the transfer documents, but contextually, I think it's relevant. My daughter had registered a holding company in September. I had not known this." "Please look at everything," I said. "I will. And I'd suggest holding off on any signing until we've spoken in depth." Already done. The second thing I was doing, quietly and without telling anyone, was going back through 4 years of operational records, tenancy agreements, maintenance records, financial statements, looking for anything that seemed off. Not because I expected to find something, but because I needed to know the full picture before I decided anything. On the 3rd day, I found it. There was a property management contract, one of the Hamilton buildings, a mid-rise residential 62 units, one of the first properties I'd bought when I expanded out of Toronto. The contract was with a firm called Ridgeline Property Services. I didn't recognize the name. According to the agreement, Ridgeline had been engaged 18 months ago to handle tenant relations and maintenance coordination on that building at a monthly management fee of $80,400. Ridgeline Property Services was registered at an address in Mississauga, my son-in-law's business address. I cross-referenced. The GST number on the Ridgeline invoices matched a numbered company that my son-in-law had incorporated in 2022. In 18 months, Ashgrove had paid Ridgeline $151,200 for services that our own internal team was already providing. I sat at my desk for a long time. The rain had come back, the same insistent October rain, and I looked out at the garden, still most green, the maples just starting to turn, and I thought about my wife saying he reminded her of a real estate agent who knew about the problem and was waiting to see if you noticed. She had noticed. She just hadn't had time to push further. I called my son in Vancouver that night. I hadn't told him any of this yet. Hadn't wanted to alarm him before I knew what I was dealing with. But I needed to hear his voice, and I needed to tell someone who wasn't a lawyer. He listened without interrupting, which is something he's always been good at. When I finished, there was a pause. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I know. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. What would you do?" Another pause. I'd want to understand exactly how much they thought they could take before I said anything. That's what I did. By the following Monday, Collins had produced a written analysis of the transfer documents. The management authority clause, she confirmed, was atypical and would have been binding. Combined with the subsidiary holding company structure my daughter had established, the effect would have been, once the transfer was signed, to give my daughter and her husband effective operational control over 38% of Ashgrove's assets, with legal mechanisms that would have made any attempt by me to reverse course both costly and time-consuming. Not impossible, but designed to be painful enough that I might not bother. Collins used the word sophisticated. She meant it as a legal description. I heard it as something else. Ridgeline, she noted, was a separate matter, potentially a matter for the CRA, and potentially for a civil claim, given that the invoices appeared to represent payments for services that had not been rendered. I had a decision to make. I could go quiet, cancel the transfer, say nothing, and simply restructure my estate documents to remove any vulnerability. My daughter would know something had changed. Her husband would know. But nothing would be said directly. Life would continue at a careful, painful distance. Or I could face it directly. I have been in business for 41 years. I have never been afraid of a direct conversation, even the ones that hurt. I called my daughter and asked her to come for dinner on the following Saturday. Just her, I said, not her husband. She paused at that, just briefly, and said, of course. I cooked roast chicken, the way her mother used to make it, with lemon and rosemary and roasted root vegetables. My daughter arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir and a look on her face that I couldn't quite place. Careful, watchful, the same composure as in Raymond's office. We ate. We talked about her brother in Vancouver, about the weather, about a property in the East End of Hamilton that had been in the news. Normal things. I let her have that. I wanted her to be comfortable enough to be honest. After dinner I made coffee, and we sat in the living room, and I put 3 pieces of paper on the table between us. The first was Collins's analysis of the Management Authority Clause. The second was the registration documents for Ridgeline Property Services, with the GST cross-reference. The third was a printed copy of the email chain, the one that included, "He won't look too closely at the residential trust structure. He trusts me. That's the whole point." She looked at all 3 without picking them up. Then she looked at me. "Dad, I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it, in the moment. I was something, but I wasn't sure anger was the right word for it. I want to understand. That's all. I want you to tell me how we got here. What followed was one of the hardest conversations of my life. Harder than telling my children their mother was dying. Harder than the call I got at 32 from my bank about the first building I almost lost. Because those were things that happened to me. This was a conversation with someone I had raised, someone I had chosen to trust. She told me a version of it. Some of it I believed. Some of it I am still not sure about. She said the management clause had been her husband's idea, that she had gone along with it without fully understanding the implications. She said the Ridgeline situation had started small, that she'd signed off on a contract her husband had set up without reading the details carefully enough, and that it had grown beyond what she'd intended. She did not say much about tea. I did not ask about tea. That's not my business. What I said at the end of it was this: I love you. That hasn't changed and it's not going to change. But I am not signing those documents. The Ridgeline payments are going to be repaid in full, and you and I are going to work out a structure for that with Collins's office. Or we're going to involve the CRA, and I'll let them work it out, and that will go however it goes. Your husband will not be involved in any future Ashgrove operations in any capacity, and my estate planning is going to reflect my actual wishes, which I will now be having reviewed by 2 separate lawyers before I sign anything ever again. She was crying by then. I handed her a box of tissues from the side table. I had put it there ahead of time, which tells you something about how well I knew her, even still. "And the company?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Give me time." That was 8 months ago. A great deal has happened since, and some of it I'm not ready to talk about publicly. What I can tell you is this. The Ridgeline matter was settled privately, with a repayment agreement facilitated through Collins's office. We did not involve the CRA, which was a decision I made deliberately and with some difficulty. My son-in-law and my daughter are separated. I don't know the details and I haven't asked. My daughter is still working for Ashgrove. That surprised some people who know the situation. It surprised me a little when I decided it. But I thought about it for a long time, and what I came back to was this. She built something real in this company over 6 years. The work she did was genuine. The deception was also genuine. Both things are true. I didn't want to erase one to avoid facing the other. We have a different relationship now, more formal in some ways, more honest maybe, in others. She comes for dinner on the second Sunday of every month. We don't talk about what happened. We talk about Hamilton and the East End property, and sometimes about her brother in Vancouver, who calls every Sunday like clockwork, and who still has no interest in commercial real estate, and who, I think, may be the wisest one among us. I never found out who sent those emails to Vic. I have thought about it many times. Whoever it was had access to my daughter's private correspondence and chose, for reasons of their own, to intervene anonymously. I asked Vic again recently. He shook his head. No idea, he said. But whoever it was, I think they cared about what happened to you. Maybe. Or maybe they had reasons I'll never understand. Either way, the result was the same. I sat in Raymond Keach's office on a rainy Tuesday in October, and the floor felt uncertain beneath me, and I did not sign. The leather folder went back on the shelf. Ashgrove is still mine, every square inch of it, and I intend to keep it that way, not out of stubbornness, and not out of grief, but because I am 63 years old and I still show up. I still know every building by address, and every tenant by name, and every roof that's going to need replacing in the next 2 years. I know this business the way you know something you built with your own hands over 41 years. No clause on page 11 was ever going to change that. The craftsman who made that leather folder did a beautiful job, incidentally. I kept it. I use it for other documents now. Different ones.